Jennifer Jones-Mitchell. Let's get into it. Today, we have an exciting guest. He's a longtime friend and colleague. He's an AI ethicist, the author of Heartificial Intelligence, Embracing Our Humanity to Maximize Machines, and Hacking Happiness, Why Your Personal Data Counts and How Tracking It Can Change the World. He's currently the Sustainability Practice Lead at the IEEE Standards Association. He's a member of the World Economic Forum on Human Rights and Technology, and the founder of the Council on Extended Intelligence, where he helped define the widely used AI principles and standards, ethically aligned design. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome John C. Havens.
Thank you for the voluminous applause. And Jennifer, it's great to see you again.
Great to see you. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it. Well, this is a huge topic, AI and ethics. So let's just dive right in. Lately, it's, of course, been all over the news about the Hollywood strike. And mainly what they seem to be striking about is residual payments on streaming devices. But, of course, we saw recently that these studios came up with their revolutionary idea where they want to have day players, background actors, show up for one day on the set, capture their image in AI, and the studios say they want to then own that image in perpetuity and use it in future productions without paying the actors and without them giving any consent of how they're using their image. So I guess this begs the question for me, don't we have an inherent right to own our image?
It's a fantastic question. And also just in terms of all of my answers, I'm just speaking for myself as like an author. I do work at IEEE, the world's largest technology association. That's actually the group that created ethically aligned design, and the Council on Extended Intelligence sort of was related to IEEE. Love my job, love IEEE, but just as a good like kind of upfront, speaking of content and all that, this is all me. So I am still a proud member of the Screen Actors Guild. I used to be an actor. So it's interesting how it's really hitting home, I think, for a lot of people, not just for actors and writers, but anyone who watches, say, a Netflix or what have you. It's a really wonderful way, I think. It's hard, but it's a very wonderful, meaning specific way for people to go, oh, I hadn't thought about, not just the famous actors who in general are going to be okay as a rule, but them and what most people would call, or Fran Drescher, the current president of SAG and AFTRA, calls a journeyman actor, which is what I was. People trying to make a living who are in the unions. Everything about their livelihood depends on their face, their visage, their identity attached to their name. When I chose my name for both Actors Equity, which when I was on Broadway and off-Broadway, for theater, actors, SAG, and AFTRA. AFTRA's focused on commercials. You have to choose your name, meaning there are other John Havenses. I've always used my middle initial. So that longer answer, and I'll try to make my other answer shorter, is basically to say if background actors' images are copied as a one-off, that is inherently going to keep them from getting not only pay for their day player roles. And I did background work in a Steve Martin movie. That's how I got on my way to SAG, called House Sitter. Years ago, I walked with a briefcase. But the critical thing, I'm not sure if it's mentioned in various articles, but so people understand, is that you join the union also to get health insurance. As an actor, you don't get health insurance if you're in the unions unless you do a certain amount of work. So if you only do one day, this might change. But the logic of it is a certain number of days or a certain number of aggregate gross income is how you get your health insurance. So these policies literally are not just harming people's livelihoods, they're harming their lives and their families' medical insurance.
Absolutely. And there are further implications beyond actors. I know colleges and universities are exploring the same kind of thing where they want to capture in AI a professor teaching a course, and then they just want to use that and replicate it without paying the professor for those courses. And it's challenging because I am a big fan of these avatars from a marketing lens. I think they're fantastic. I mean, you and I have been there where you spend weeks and weeks with a client's product expert and get them in video doing product demos and talking about their subject matter expertise, only to have the client say, oh, John's no longer working with us. You got to start with somebody else. So to have an AI avatar be that company spokesperson, whether it's from a library of avatars or whether it's like I'm actually developing my own avatar of myself to use for future videos because it's easier. You don't have to do hair and makeup and you don't have costly shoots and stuff. So I see the value in AI avatars. I know a lot of known actors are apparently licensing their avatar for future productions. But again, it goes back to they will get paid. They will have control over how their avatar is used. So I think we have to have some guardrails in place there. And I'm not sure exactly what those will look like. But I know there's also the issue of copyright with generative AI. Let's say somebody asks one of these GAI tools to write an article about ethics in AI and humanity in AI. And that tool pulls from one of your books. It doesn't source it. It doesn't say, according to John C. Havens, blah, blah, blah. It just gives that information. So the person who asked for that article will then pass it off as their own thought. So obviously there's a copyright infringement issue. I know Sarah Silverman's been talking about that a lot. But there's also the issue when you don't source the content that there's a bias with it. I mean, if it's sourcing something that has already been discredited, that has already been proven to be false, then how do we work around that?
Well, again, it's a lot of great questions. And there's a movie, I forget the name of the movie. Maybe you can post it in the show notes. It came out about 4 years ago with Robin Wright Penn, wonderful actor. And it's a really interesting film because I've watched not every, but let's just say most of all the dystopian things you could mention, from Black Mirror to all the films, and read a lot of those books. And because it's also just a thought experiment. How do you think about scenarios, not just the future? Anyway, her film, I forget what it's called, but she plays herself. And this is like 4 years ago, maybe longer. I remember watching it like 2 or 3 years ago. She plays herself, and it's before she got famous again with the Kevin Spacey series that she was on. I'm blanking on it.
House of Cards.
Yeah, House of Cards, which she was fantastic in. So it was very brave of her to do, because there's a character playing her agent and was like, Robin, you got famous in The Princess Bride and you were everybody's favorite. And what they do is they actually bring her into CGI type environment, green screen. I assume it's maybe they just shot an actual type of equipment they use, where she had like the haptic things on her, and they shot her in the scene from every possible angle. But she's very sad in the scene, because right beforehand they give her a contract for, I think it's $1 million or multiple millions of dollars. Now in her case, she's still Robin Wright Penn, and she is sad, but it's a good film to watch in the sense of the artistry that she knows she's giving up. And she goes to see a film with a CGI recreated version of herself.
Oh, wow.
And they kind of mock a Hollywoodese kind of like, superhero type of thing. But the studios, the people playing the studio folks, it's interesting how much it was a vision of what's happening now, without really, talking about, writers' strikes and all that. But it's harrowing to watch as an actor, more so because a former actor, as a journeyman actor, I'm like, this is fascinating for those who are the Robin Wright Penns of the world, which is like I used to compare like being a journeyman actor, where I was in all 3 unions. I'd been on Broadway. I played a cop in Law and Order like 6 or 7 times. As a rule, people were still like, oh, like at parties and stuff. Oh, my sister knew Julia Roberts. Like there was always that, like, no one understood the business. No one understood the business, because they had a friend of a friend. And then the second you said the work you did, either they'd say like, how much money, like the rude questions, what do you make per year as an actor? Right. And you're like, well, a good year is 60, 70 grand. And like, oh, and they kind of walk away, 60 grand. And I'm like, well, I'm following my passion. I've been in films with, Pierce Brosnan and Rene Russo. I've got to be in plays with Christopher Walken and Blythe Danner and did Chekhov and know how to talk about all these things. How much do you make? 60 grand. So a journeyman actor, the background thing that you mentioned, you're just decimating people's lives.
Yeah.
And the thing about the copyright, someone quoting from my book and then not giving credit, let's just say what it is. It's absolutely reprehensible, morally wrong, legally not horrible. Like there's just nothing about it. There's no, whether it's an open, ChatGPT or whoever else, and well, this and this, and we'll get to these conversations pretty soon. But what you won't get to do is talk about intellectual property or copyright from any of the large Silicon Valley companies without dealing with a raft of lawyers.
Exactly.
Who will say you can't use this code from Apple or whatever else. And by the way, I'm not necessarily saying they don't have a right to stand on that, but corporate IP law, as compared to the identity housed in what we create and as individuals, the data that our unique existence makes up in the real virtual metaverse, extended reality worlds. I don't like saying metaverse because it doesn't credit Neil Stephenson, who wrote the book Snow Crash, which is earlier versions of augmented reality. So as a writer, the other thing is just, let's just say what we're also doing. If society says this is okay in any form, it's saying the original creators of any content are immaterial.
Right. Well, is it possible for these companies to go back into these tools, into the code, and require it to source it? Because that would only make my use of it better. If I turn to GAI to help me write an article, and I can then say in my article, according to John C. Havens, that simply makes my argument stronger. And if I see something where the source is clearly discredited, I now know not to use it. So is that an option? Can we require these companies to require GAI to provide the source?
I'm in a skeptical mood today, and I want to be positive and not get angry. I find it very hard to not go to a place of rage.
Sure.
So I'm trying to be, because it's just great to see you, meeting you, Jennifer, see a friend. The folks who are helping out recording, thank you so much. And just to talk, because what we're doing right now, Jennifer and John talking, I'm being skeptical because if companies are required, that phrase, what does it mean?
Yeah.
GDPR is the closest thing we've had to sort of, I think, some of these larger issues about data. And now is it really genuine consent where GDPR, myself included, you click cookies and accept all cookies. Sure, accept all cookies.
Yeah.
And the whole infrastructure of protecting people's data and identity through what I've called for years, modeled after people like Doc Searls or countries like Estonia, having a algorithmic level personal assistant, right? Where you, Jennifer, could say, hey, here's the 10 things. I've always pictured as like pull down menus.
Yep.
I don't mind my data being shared in these ways when I'm marketing. I don't mind my data. But that algorithmic, human driven AI or Jennifer tool would be an algorithm.
Yeah.
That would be attached to your identity through blockchain or some other safe, recourse. And it's not that big of a deal. Like, this is the thing that people, like, oh, but what that, it just means I'm not telling Jennifer what to do.
Right.
I'm giving her tools that
choice.
will make sense for her. And this is as a parent for our children, our kids. Then when that, from a former working in PR, right? When that algorithm comes into contact with a signal, again, this is Doc Searls' must-read book for any marketers out there called The Intention Economy. It's the underlying principles, not just the 17-hour conversations with my personal data geeks and you argue about blockchain versus DAOs and all that. Great conversations. Here, it's just a very fundamental thing that's been available to do for, I think, well over a decade. And it's very complex, but very simple logic. If I had this tool that was available, then every time any algorithm encountered my data, which would go back to your example of if I was able to house all the words copywritten through Penguin and the publishers that publish my work, et cetera. But those were words attributed to, because again, this is the thing, is that book is not just about me. My publishers deserve the credit as well and the money,
Mm-hmm.
Then when someone quoted it through a Chiron or whatever else, and when people are like, oh, that's really hard to do. And then we talk about software being sentient. That always fascinates me. Like people like, it's really hard to put a stamp on an algorithm, but my phone is alive and I'm going to fight for its rights. I'm like, hold up. So all that is to say is that we are the authors of our own lives.
Yes.
Intellectual property of our lives should morally inherently belong to us. And where there's these like, well, this and that, companies fight, and I'm not necessarily against this, but they fight so hard for intellectual property and things like patents.
Mm-hmm.
Patents, and then if you want to have the conversation about don't hinder innovation, I always talk about the greatest hindrance to innovation is the current business model, competitive business model, intellectual property law, and tax havens.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing to do with ethics or freedom of expression. Those things alone, a new company trying to start, you're like, here's my idea. What is it now? Here's my idea for that. What do I have? I will work to get acquired as a company, work insane hours for a couple of years with whatever runway of cash I have. I get acquired and go into the same system that values first and foremost exponential growth.
Yeah, and it goes back to, I saw where you posted something recently about synovation and this whole idea of basically we can measure and we can try to have protections, but we don't want to halter and hold back innovation while we're building. I mean, you have to do it simultaneously. You have to build in the protections, and you don't want to necessarily stop innovation, but you also want to make sure that you're doing it ethically and responsibly. It goes back to, we were talking about, incorrect information in these GAI tools. Now, my understanding is all of generative AI was trained on the entirety of the internet, right? So we're talking about published works, for example. Well, generationally, most published works just over the millennium, over and over, represent that cisgender white male POV, because there are just fewer minority works published in general. So there's already inherent that kind of bias in the perspective, in the point of view of the content that it is drawing from. And then I think it was Stephanie Wong wrote a paper where, I can't remember if it was ChatGPT or which tool, but they asked a GAI tool to identify passengers who would be at risk or create a risk for airlines. And because the GAI tool was trained on the internet, which has its own human bias built in, every passenger that was flagged was from a Middle Eastern country. So how do we get around when the source material, when it is trained on biased, racist, or just a singular point of view type of content, how do we get around that?
It's a big question, but let me ask you a question first.
Okay.
What's innovation?
What is innovation? That's a big question, too. Innovation is doing something new in a new way that solves a problem, I guess.
What does success mean for innovation? When someone says, Jennifer, I love your definition of innovation you just gave. Now go be innovative over here with who? And then what does success look like for said innovation?
It would have to be something that achieves a greater good that serves society. To me, that's what positive, good innovation, successful innovation would be.
And then but I'm not trying to test you, I'm just trying to prove it with your answers. How would you say this is good?
Again, it goes back to who is defining good. To me, that would be serving society in a positive way. But how do you define what that positive way is? How do you even define what serving society is? So, yeah, it's such a layered question. I don't know exactly.
Well, I'm not asking to challenge or be
sure.
Facetious or whatever. It's more, I believe that for all the design work or policy work I'm a part of, innovation means prioritizing at the outset of design, environmental and human flourishing.
Yeah.
And then throughout all of the impact and use of any algorithm, product, service, system, not just AI, having metrics that say, here's how we know that that tool is improving environmental flourishing, not harming, and improving human well-being and mental health.
Yes.
And I bring that up because where innovation typically in my world is defined is by financial metrics and isolation. Mm-hmm. Hey, that innovation, whatever else it did, it made this much money. Oh, that is innovative. Right now, to be fair, when someone's like, hey, this thing failed and made no money, you might be like, let's discuss, right? But where the innovation is, to your point, changing something for good, mm-hmm. where someone's like, hey, there's this innovation in this new mental health technique that's really helping teens struggling with suicide. Oh, cool. Is it making money? No, but it's changed 100,000 lives. Okay. Again, people are not going to normally be like upset that happens. But the point is, where does stuff rise to the top? And when you talk about words like scale, and for businesses, to be fair, right, developing something where there's no clear metrics of accountability or success that won't be framed in the key performance indicators they're legally required to give ultimately, which is usually shareholder, mm-hmm. investor benefits, then what I will say for myself is innovation, unless other definitions are given in any context, mm-hmm. in any context, unless it is stated otherwise, will always be innovation equals something that ultimately is measured, maybe not only, but largely by financial metrics alone. And that means that, again, someone might be like, look at how many kids' lives were saved with these tools.
Right.
Somewhere there's, and by the way, it's justified and created by the economics of how those things are even justified to come into play. And we bucket things in society, straight up corporate, Silicon Valley IPO type logic for money, NGO funding, grant funding. So there's some delineations in there, right? Innovation sometimes like, oh, it's an NGO or charity. That is innovative. And up here is kind of like, I don't care because there's no money involved.
Right.
Versus like the innovation, and I want to make this positive, that's the end of this answer. What's the innovation for all humans to say, I'm freaked out about climate change? It's a huge, massive, scary thing, whether I want to deny it, whether I believe it, whether I'm in New Jersey and see the sky turning orange, or I'm in Pakistan and I want to be sensitive to people in Pakistan and floods come. I think there's something not great happening here, and rather than get overwhelmed by it, I'm going to shut down. And the innovation is now to say, hold on, whether it's AGI or ChatGPT or any other technical tool, do you feel you have worth? And you have the time to explore for yourself these fears, and to be able to have the tools to be equipped to shift those fears to relationality to other people. We're really the solutions, and I'd like to make this part of this interview, the ultimate solutions about any achievement towards really having regenerative sustainability, meaning keeping the planet safe for all 8 billion people for 7 generations to come. The only answer that I have found, and I'm happy to back this up with the type of stuff I've already been talking about, accountable metrics, the SDGs, ESGs, environmental, factors, and businesses, how they can flourish, right, is to recognize that if we don't come together in a partnership way with our own selves and with others, and that includes not just in our communities, political divides, globally, we will not keep this planet from doing what it's already doing. And she'll do whatever she needs to do. I use the pronoun she for the planet. She's going to keep getting warmer. She's like, hey, everybody, it is the hottest year on record, or the hottest summer.
Right.
And 1976 was a kind of an outlier. Stop talking about it. You can be scared. I am doing what I need to do. According to the World Wildlife Federation, since 1970, 69% of all species are gone.
Wow.
And that means it's not just like, oh, I miss the red-brown, highlighted raccoon from the Spanish Madeira region. No, it means a bird that in its poop carries seeds for trees. Those trees don't don't happen anymore. That carbon is not caught or sequestered. Those animals that we eat die, the fish in the oceans with plastic, et cetera, et cetera. But rather than being doomsday, because by the way, reporting science is not doomsday if you're just saying, here's my sources. They bring kind of similar results, which aren't really overly happy or encouraging. Mm-hmm. But again, innovation for me is what a wonderful opportunity, a deeply needed opportunity for the innovation of people to say, I have worth and I need to take care of this beautiful planet. And the innovation that will come with mental health, incorporating spirituality and faith into business, talking about things like ChatGPT, not on this call, because I'm happy about this call, but in isolation.
Right.
I'm mentioning Elon Musk for the 17th billion time versus 1/10 of that airspace going to these same people.
Right.
And taking that energy and saying, let's get plastic out of the ocean. Let's make people love each other better. Those new conversations are the innovation we need.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think when it comes to AI, we're starting to fall back into old patterns in the sense of, it was kind of breaking news that 7 of the AI companies, and I'll throw them up on the screen, but it's Amazon, Anthropic, Google, Inflection, Meta, Microsoft, and OpenAI. They've all agreed to adhere to the Biden administration's 7 requirements. But, okay, these are the requirements. Again, I'll put this up on the screen, but these companies agree to internal and external security testing. Doesn't say by whom, doesn't say what they're testing for. They agree to information sharing to manage at-risk results. They agree to invest in their own cybersecurity. They agree to facilitate third-party reporting on vulnerabilities. We don't know how they're defining those vulnerabilities or who those third-party people will be. They agree to watermarking systems. They agree to report on inappropriate uses of AI, but that's not defined. They agree to prioritize the bias issue, but they aren't saying how. And then to what you were just saying, they agree that they are required to address societal concerns, but they're not explaining how. There's no metrics applied to it. There's no measurement. Isn't this the same thing we did back in the day with social media companies where we allowed them to self-regulate and self-police, and it didn't work? It goes back to what you're saying. If we want to solve real problems and stop just talking about the buzzwords of this, we could truly require these AI companies to commit to environmental change or to really addressing big issues in a big way. But that would require them to reveal a lot of their potential IP. That would require them to adhere to other people and the government, possibly, and certainly associations regulating what they do. And I don't know that they're going to do that.
But they won't.
Well, there we go.
This is where my skepticism, meaning I could come up with some answers. And I have friends that work at a lot of those places, so I don't want to dismiss some of the noble, excellent work that they are or will do.
Sure.
Also recent people that come to mind, Meredith Whitaker at Signal, or Tinmit Gibru, or Joey Buolamwini, different people fighting specific, targeted, real educationally oriented battles and tools of communication to let people know about these things. But I think one thing to be fair to these companies is, and I think it was Kari Johnson who wrote the Wired article, and I know Kari from different circles, wonderful writer, and the subtitle of Pinky Swear, I think it was in his.
Yeah.
Without a regulation, it's to be fair to the companies in any situation. Like, sure, we'll do our best to be responsible. What are you going to say? Like,
yeah,
no, we're not focused on responsibility, And then things like watermarking. Like, I just had a wonderful conversation with what's Jane's last name? Jane Anderson. Yeah, Jane Anderson is a woman who's, I think she still teaches at NYU, who does a lot of work on indigenous data sovereignty issues. Now, it's not watermarking, her labeling that she does for indigenous issues is incredible in its specificity and in its way of saying for certain First Nations or indigenous people, this website has a label that says "We, our community," gives a thumbs up to how this content is revealed. I cannot even tell you how overwhelmingly, astoundingly good it is. So if anything else from this interview, besides, of course, your wisdom and awesomeness, Jennifer, is people should check out Jane Anderson's work. And I'm really proud that at IEEE, I introduced Jane and her colleague, Stephanie, and some others, people in their working group, many who are Indigenous themselves, to create a standard through IEEE, which all that means is I just said, hey, do you want to do this? They said yes. And now they're the ones doing the work. Labeling and watermarking, I've known about for years as an actor. Mm-hmm. Quick story. Back in the day, I did a Dunkin' Donuts commercial, and it was pre-internet. So that tells you how old it was. And it was in the East Coast, so you got paid by region back at that time through AFTRA. So I did a Northeast commercial. It was really fun. I had a lot of fun shooting it. It was me and this nurse, and it was comical. But to be crystal clear, again, it was in the Northeast region. I got paid for 13 weeks for that cycle in that region.
Right. Had
it run national, that's back in the day when my friends were like, I got a national. You could pay for a house. You know, a buddy of mine was the Todd, who was Burger King. He wore the Burger King head and got so much money. I'm so happy that he did because it was national. Anyway, what happened is I did the commercial, and a lot of friends from the West Coast of the US were calling me and saying, great spot, great Dunkin' Donuts spot. And I was like, how are you seeing it? And they're like, thing with the nurse. I'm like, yeah. And they're like, okay. So I called SAG, and at the time, or after or both, and said, obviously people are watching my spot. And at the time, the technology they said was, well, tell your friends to sit by the TV with a VHS tape, and try to record, tell them to record whatever show they're watching that night. But, the same time frame they watched it, and then have them send us the tape. So it was like, okay, basically it's not going to happen. But what I'm certain happened is that I assume somebody, and I already said their name, so sorry, Duncan, if it was you or whoever, did something with the release, and maybe it didn't happen, but it did. And the point there being, like, I learned early on, like, oh, people go around different things. And so the people going, the whole thing about the Biden, I just call it theater. It's the same thing. It's like every time Zuckerberg's gone to DC, I'm just like, they should just sell popcorn and T-shirts and just make it what it is. And then if they can at least say educational theater by having people like Joy Buolamwini, she's gone, and when she expresses in her Twitter account that she's encouraged by what the Biden administration is doing, then I'm encouraged. I've only met Joy a couple times, but she's the person that taught me. I met her at an Aspen event years ago, that it's the phenotypes of the data sets, meaning the skin, how the skin colors are actually defined, that in the hardware and software. And if I have this wrong, please go to her work, Joy Buolamwini. She's been on the cover of Time and stuff, rightly so. She's amazing. That was one of the first things that I was like, oh, the underlying signals of so much of modern AI, whatever the system, whatever the methodology, whatever else, the data sets and the societal aspects of how things are classified underlying everything, and this is according to her, are still racist in nature, where racist means those phenotypes, hardware wasn't even able to identify brown or black skin tones. So that's fundamentally, an issue that those 7 companies saying whatever, when you have someone like a Joy going to DC and also saying, great companies, when you do those classifications and those watermarks, can you use the phenotype classifications that I've used, that I'm recommending, or that Tim McGibru, or that, mainly so many women that I admire who are saying, here's how to see and classify things that aren't normally seen by the tech pros.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, it's so interesting. I agree. It's the announcement this week. It's just window dressing. It's just the usual, oh, we're going to self-police. I know that I'm working with some marketing and PR associations to try to at least set up guardrails within our industry. But I think the only thing that's really going to make a difference is true regulation that, that it's a much longer discussion, of course, but I think that's the only thing that's really going to happen. Otherwise, we're just going to have more window dressing, and it's going to be the same thing that happened with social media, where, oh, we're going to self-regulate, we'll police ourselves, and we end up with misinformation and, the mess that we're in today. Well, I think that's all the time we have right now. So I really appreciate you joining me today, and hopefully we'll set up another one and continue this conversation.
Sure. And just as a positive final thing, and I know we only have a couple minutes, so I'll make this fast. The positive side of the stuff, regulation, all that type of stuff, disclosure tends to be seen as either boring or arduous. Where, like, as a parent, when my kids wanted to run into the street as a kid, you first of all, you just made sure they didn't run into the street. Second of all, regulation, disclosure, when you're telling people about things that can help them, that's very positive. And the program that I'm leading at IEEE, just to give a quick pitch, it's all free. It's called Planet Positive 2030. You can Google that phrase and the letters IEEE. We have a big paper called Strong Sustainability by Design. It provides very positive but also realistic thoughts about economics, AI, listening to the indigenous voices that have to be part of these conversations. We have a chapter on economics, caring economy, for instance, and we're looking for feedback. So it's all free, and then your feedback, one's feedback will be posted with your name and affiliation and published to the community later, and that could inform the creation of IEEE standards. We created the Wi-Fi standard. So your time at reading any of the 400-page document, don't be overwhelmed. You can just read the introduction. It's 3 pages, 4 pages, and provide your feedback would really mean a lot to me and to others. And then all the great questions you've asked here, Jennifer. For me, I want to make sure that, like, I may be skeptical or whatever, but not when it comes to the beauty of our planet. All these amazing geeks like you and me really trying to say, how do we use the tools to help companies and people? And ultimately, like I said, the main message is partnership, caregiving. Those are the innovations that fundamentally make us human in relation to each other. Tools, AI, awesome. That's why I'm a geek. But to save this glorious, beautiful planet, one thing you can do is check out that paper.
Absolutely. I'll provide a link in the notes on this, and let's have another conversation about it. Give me a time to read it, and we'll circle back to it.
All right, and I'll interview you for that. How's that?
I love it. Let's do that. Thank you so much, John. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invite.
Thank you.